and welcome to Our Voices. I'm Amina Aliyu, joined by my colleagues Aryan and Siminesh. Hello, ladies. Hello. Today we're going to enjoy the company of our colleague Anita Powell, White House correspondent. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Anita.
Always a pleasure.
Except I feel left out. They say that they've met you before.
Definitely.
And I've only seen your name on Teams and on emails and when I'm giving you credit.
It's always great to have her because we get a real fresh perspective on these official trips, and you tell us inside information that most people don't have, so it's great to have her always.
And also, luckily for me, it's not only on this show. I've known her for like 15 years now.
I'm jealous. They ate last week.
Lily's saying that she's known me for 15 years, yet if you look at Lily 15 years ago, she looks exactly the same as she did 15 years ago, which is remarkable. I'd like to know that secret. Anyway.
Precisely. So, Anita, we're definitely going to be asking you about the trip that you accompanied the Vice President on.
How was it?
It was a whirlwind. We went to 3 countries. We basically crisscrossed the continent. We began in Ghana on the west, and then we went over to Tanzania, and then we went south to Zambia. And throughout, she kind of stressed 3 things: women's empowerment, democratization, and improving the digital economy. So these were the 3 tenets of the trip, the things that kind of wove this trip together.
So tell us, can you summarize the trip in 1 word?
Wow. I mean, we went... Hectic?
One word.
Hectic maybe would be the word, to be very honest,
obviously.
because it was nonstop. That's a really good question that I don't know. You'll have to come back to me later on that. Well, I'm going to think about that right now.
You haven't had time to soak everything in.
Yeah, it's only been a few days since I got back.
Definitely. So last week, Vice President Kamala Harris became the highest-ranking Biden administration official to visit the African continent. Her trip took her to Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. Her office said they worked on strengthening partnerships, security, and economic prosperity. Analysts say her mere presence as the first female vice president who has ancestral ties to the continent is significant in itself. VOA's Anita Powell traveled with the vice president, and she has more. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we'll be talking about the impact that her trip has had on average citizens across the continent, especially on young women and girls. Welcome to Our Voices.
Well, Africa and the U.S. share not only grim past, but also a hopeful future. Vice President Kamala Harris emphasized this on her first official voyage to the continent, where in one day she covered both the possibilities ahead and the pain that links both societies. VOA Anita Powell, who's here with us, did this report from Cape Coast, Ghana.
Vice President Kamala Harris minced no words about a foundational truth of the United States after a moving tour of Cape Coast Castle, which for many enslaved Africans was their last view of home before they were shipped across the Atlantic in chains in the bottom of overcrowded ships.
The descendants of the people who walked through that door were strong people, proud people, people of deep faith, people who loved their families, their traditions, their culture, and carried that innate being with them through all of these periods. Went on to fight for civil rights, fight for justice in the United States of America and around the world. And all of us, regardless of your background, have benefited from their struggle and their fight for freedom and for justice.
Harris is on her first vice presidential tour of the continent, which takes her to Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. Speaking to 8,000 young people in Ghana's capital, Accra, she outlined what she sees as the continent's hopeful future.
Together, we can unleash growth and opportunity that far exceeds what either the public or private sector can achieve on its own. And the United States is committed to build these types of partnerships to increase digital inclusion on the continent. And finally, to create inclusive economic growth and to advance innovation, we must continue to support and invest in good governance and democracy.
Ghana's president said her visit has made a difference.
I'm happy to state that this afternoon's meeting has further boosted the steadfast cooperation between us. and Ghana will continue to collaborate with the United States of America at all levels.
Harris now continues to Tanzania and then to Zambia. Anita Powell, VOA News, Cape Coast, Ghana.
Joining us live from Accra, Ghana, to discuss how VP Harris's tour impacted her own project is Daisy Mina Antwi, a Ghanaian communication specialist and co-curator of World Speech Day Ghana. She is also a curator for Gold Coast Literacy Program, GLP, a non-profit that advocates for children's literacy in Ghana's slums and rural areas. Welcome, Daisy, and thank you for joining our discussion today.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for having me. Greetings from Ghana, Accra, Ghana.
So I'm just going to get right into it, Daisy. You know, with the VP's trip to Ghana, VP's trip to the continent in general, about $1 billion has been set aside to promote women empowerment, girl-child education, and all these fun projects. I want to know, how does a non-profit like yours benefit from such money? How does it trickle down to you?
And so we have an issue. I think I'm going to go viral after this, but I have to say my piece. Most of a non-profit like ours don't get access to such funds. What is going to happen is that money is going to be disseminated to help to the right sources, but through the government. For me, I try to be self-resilient. My non-profit is not affiliated to any religious body or political party, because I don't want any interest of conflict. So Ms. Harris made the promise, the money has been given. We're here hoping that some people like us, non-profit, who don't really associate with the presidential thing or political parties, would also have access to the funding. But for now, I think it's going to be by whom you know.
Mm-hmm. So you attended an event where Vice President Harris was meeting and talking to civil society organizations. What was that like? Right. Did she say anything that stayed with you?
Yes. I felt very resonated with her words. I enjoyed her speech. And I felt somehow connected, very connected. I was seeing myself out there. I was seeing myself standing on the page and where she was. I was like, this is me. And everything that she said, everything that she had mentioned, is something that we, the young leaders of Ghana, and of course Africa as a whole, are trying to make it happen in terms of digitalization, in terms of making the dreams happen, in terms of changing the narrative when it comes to Africa. So our take-home thing was when she said, we together, like we're collective force, and we're going to make this happen. And I like how she personalized it. She said, you, me, together, all of us. And I was like, okay, there's an all-inclusive something. Sometimes we young leaders here feel like, okay, the Western world is not really with us. You have to go through certain things before you are accepted into the Western system. So for her, coming down to our level and making us know that she's with us till the end, I think it was a good take-home thing for me.
Mm. Daisy, it's so good to see you again. I was in the background while you were at the table with the Vice President, so it's nice to catch up again. What really stuck with you that the Vice President said when we all left and it was just you, the women entrepreneurs, and the Vice President?
Sorry, your question again.
Just what stuck with you after all of us left the room and it was just you guys and the Vice President? What did she say that resonated with you or that stuck with you? Did she give you any advice? And did you ask her for anything?
Personally, I didn't ask for anything, but I think as the willpower, she is a whole force. She's an epitome of a woman lead. And so even if she doesn't say anything, she just seems there with us and encouraging us in her own way. Her life is an example that we all want to be like, but not really be the next VP, but of course, go through the milestone that she has channeled into her success. And so being in that room with her, it was like a dream come true. It was like, this is it for us. And we tried our best to assimilate whatever advice that she gave, especially she hammered on the importance of women in this world and what we can achieve as women, not slacking as women, and being women leaders.
Thank you so much, Daisy Mina Atwani, for joining us today. We'll have to stop the conversation here. Daisy is the founder of Gold Coast Literacy Program. She joined us from Accra, Ghana. It's now time for a break. We want to ask you, our audience, to share your voice on Vice President Kamala Harris' visit to Africa on our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at VOA Africa. We are also on WhatsApp, and our number is US country code +1 202 503 9025. Use the hashtag VOA Our Voices. When we return, we'll have more on the historic implications of the first female US Vice President with ancestral ties to the continent, as we take a closer look at Kamala Harris meeting Africa's only female head of state, Samia Suluhu Hassan of Tanzania. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You are with Our Voices. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris pledged continuing cooperation with Tanzania as she met with the country's president, the only female head of state in Africa, on her first official visit to the continent. Viewers Anita Powell, who is with us today, filed this report from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris arrived on the second stop of her Whirlwind Africa tour Thursday, meeting with Africa's only female head of state, Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan. She took office when the president died in 2021 and rolled back some of his unpopular policies, such as a ban on pregnant girls going to school and limits on freedoms of expression. The U.S. will provide $560 million in bilateral assistance to Tanzania next fiscal year. On Thursday, Harris said the U.S. will expand U.S.-Tanzania commercial engagement, work toward delivery of battery-grade nickel from Tanzania to the U.S. and the global market as soon as 2026, expand affordable broadband and cooperation in democratic development, biodiversity, women's empowerment, and health projects.
Thanks to the progress of your administration, you have made a champion. You have been a champion in terms of democratic reforms in this country, and in that way have expanded our partnership. And so today then is part of the strengthening of the relationship between our two countries, and under your leadership, I have full confidence that we will be able to do just that.
Today, Tanzania has made another historic milestone with two female leaders, the Vice President and the President, meeting here at the State House in Dar es Salaam.
Several students waited for hours at the airport and at the State House to see the highest-ranking woman in America.
She motivates us and she gave us many opportunities, so we are proud of her. I'm expecting a lot of changes in education, in politics, also in finance, economic. We really need to be like America, at least like American economic.
Harris also paid her respects to victims of the deadly 1998 U.S. embassy bombing. She heads to her final stop on a trip to the southern African nation of Zambia. Anita Powell, VOA News, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Wow, that's very well. Thank you, Anita, for that report. Now, before my colleagues and I get into our discussion about this trip, Kamala Harris's trip, let's take a look at what people on the continent had to say about the Vice President's visit on Your Voice segment. And then Anita Powell will shed more light on her coverage of the trip.
So what Harris's visit clearly has one agenda. Of course, in this summit, they want to use things like lesbian, gay, whatever. They'll use queer terminology. But we know what the agenda is. And we are saying this is a Christian nation. This is who we are. And indeed, if it is a democratic summit, and if indeed America is really worried or really want to enhance the democracy of Africa, they should allow Africa to govern. They should allow Africa to make its own decision. They should allow Africa to guard its identity, to guard its culture.
In Tanzania, we have a saying that goes, a guest should come and the host should be killed. But due to the challenges of our Tanzania, I do not think that this trip will be successful.
All right, guys, let's get into it. With Vice President Harris and produce the excellent packages we just said. What else would you like to bring to our attention with regards to, the significance of this trip?
Well, she is the highest-ranking woman in U.S. history. And I think that, without saying a word, Vice President Harris managed to speak volumes. She's, of course, not the head of state, and Africa has had several female heads of state. So this is a continent that already understands.
Familiar with female heads of state.
To some extent, female leadership. Until we have all 54 countries taking care of, I'm not sure we can say that.
I mean, let America have one, and then,
Well,
right.
Yeah, but, as we've just watched in the Vox Pop and how the women were strongly expressing themselves, and we will continue to see U.S. officials go on the continent to strengthen the relationships and, of course, to follow up on the U.S.-Africa summit. But there is a topic that constantly comes up whenever the West goes onto the continent, which is different from when the East goes on the continent. And I can say maybe the LGBT issue we just heard. Is that where things fall apart? Between the relationships?
I would put this under the wider umbrella of human rights, which is, of course, something that's very top of mind in U.S. society. And I think we have to remember that U.S. officials, especially at the level of Kamala Harris, who has to be responsive to her population, do have to, they have to mirror that. They have to echo that. So it might be that we're seeing the Vice President speak about these human rights issues because her electorate really does care. And that is important. That's important in a democracy because we expect our leaders to speak up about the things that matter to people.
So the division will continue to be there as long as they're seeing things differently, I guess.
Well, I think I'd just like to emphasize one very important distinction between the Russian and Chinese visits to the continent and the American visit. China is not a democracy. Russia is not a democracy. These are leaders who send envoys to the continent or deploy them around the world, but their mandate is not to speak for their population and to be accountable to their population in the same way that we expect of American leaders. And I think that is a big distinction. So yes, there was a lot of back and forth about should she have brought this up. This is a very delicate discussion that American leaders have when they travel anywhere and they encounter these things that their voters care about.
Now, since you mentioned China and Russia, frankly, I don't have a question. It's more a comment. I'm just simply not impressed by this trip. I see it as the West realizing that Africa is useful and that they're losing their hold on Africa because you look at Hollywood is declining. There's a rise in Eastern pop culture, K-pop, K-drama, anime, I don't know, Bollywood, like everything else is rising. And I look at this trip and I just see them using women to just mirror progress because these days you just sprinkle women on everything and then it looks like it's progress. So what I see is the West America on this particular trip desperately trying to hang on to their space in the world as the hegemon when they're looking at China coming in with infrastructure and business and so many other things. And just like Ariane said, it's like you've been fighting for Africa's liberation for God knows how long. Now a country like Uganda, for example, is bringing out laws. Whether or not it's appropriate is one thing, but they're governing themselves how they see fit. What gives other people the moral superiority to say that this is how this should be or this is how it shouldn't be?
I can answer that right now. It's the United Nations has a charter on human rights that every member country of the United Nations signs on to. Now, the norms and the language evolves and has in the last 60 years, but to say that we should, you know, as the Uganda bill, which was colloquially called the Kill the Gays bill, to say that law is in keeping with any of their international legal commitments is just not true. And so I think it's less of a moral argument than it is what did they commit to when they joined this multilateral body that, you know, is human rights led, that is guided by human rights and principles, and killing sexual minorities just doesn't meet that legal bar.
Definitely, but then shouldn't that evolve? Because at the time that a lot of these countries signed on to the charter, they were being led by certain values, Western values. Yet people are finding themselves, people are celebrating their culture, people are rediscovering their culture. Shouldn't this evolve as well, where we respect other people's values?
Maybe to add on that point, you know, you said China is not democratic, Russia is not democratic,
which is not a stretch, by the way. That's not out of line.
But the relationship is there with African continent, between China and Africa, Russia and Africa. The relationship is there, and the West, which in previous years used to put you know, democracy, human rights as a precondition for the relationships and the partnership, is now trying to see if they can compete with that, you know, with no precondition a relationship Africa has with other.
The East doesn't have a precondition to work and do business.
Exactly. Let me give you an example. In the 1990s, we had what the Western world called a dictator, Sani Abacha, and they put so many sanctions and XYZ because he had well, the state had executed Ken Saro-Wiwa for being a traitor at that time. And all the sanctions were put on Nigeria. And you know what he did? He just looked to the east. And he opened up business with China and Russia, and that's what Nigeria still benefits from. And guess what? Eventually, the West still had to play ball because whether you like it or not, a country like Nigeria is useful in that region. So he used it as power play to gain respect. And he was a lot of things. He's on the spectrum. It really just depends on how you look at who Sani Abacha was.
Like Museveni says, if you don't want to be friends with us, we'll find other friends. And that's kind of like how they have been working. African leaders have been doing.
I mean, U.S. is not trying to catch up and trying to make that strong relationship there. But as we heard from the young lady in Tanzania, people still think that this is not going to work. This is not going to be successful. So what do you see was different from the VP trip? I mean, we had the First Lady there. We had other U.S. officials traveling there in the last few months. So what is different?
Well, so this is the highest level trip that we've had to the continent so far. And I do have to note that every head of state did slyly work in, we would like to see the president visit. So that I thought that was very interesting that they all said, it's nice that you're here, but we'd like the president to come as well. But this was the highest level. She did announce a number of initiatives while she was there, which the First Lady does not really have the formal power to be able to do. She can reiterate U.S. policy, and when she does, it is, and when she shifts U.S. policy, it is something that is meaningful, whereas the First Lady doesn't have a lot of influence over U.S. policy. So it was a very meaningful trip in that way, but I don't think we should expect immediate results from something like this. I mean, how long would it take you to spend $1 billion?
I think that's what she did. But then how does it directly impact women and young girls? You heard the guest that we had. She said that NGOs like her don't get direct access to that money. So again, I feel as though you just sprinkle women on something to mirror progress and distract people from the reality of what's going on. She said that she doesn't affiliate with any political, she doesn't affiliate with any political party, so it's based on who you know. So
on the lighter note,
how does that affect the average person?
Right, it's understandable. But on the lighter note, she did try to bring the connection between her father and her grandfather and the continent. How did that play out, and how did people receive that?
So, as Zambia's president said when she arrived, welcome home.
Okay.
This is a welcoming. You are of us. You are from us. You've been here before, and that was really meaningful. I think for the vice president, it was meaningful for her to see the house, the property where her grandfather lived, and this brought a personal connection to it.
That's great.
So yeah, it was meaningful.
Well, wasn't this a very interesting and stimulating conversation?
Yes.
Wouldn't you say that, ladies?
Yes, we're always so happy.
It's always good to have Anita here.
Yes,
Anita, I'm going to vote you as just a permanent host here.
Oh, thank you. Too kind.
And that is our show for this week.
Yes. Well, we want to keep her a little bit. I think we might have a little bit more time, and maybe Anita can tell us. Maybe did you see maybe people expressing themselves to her about how they feel about her trip? Because we haven't really gotten a chance to see what people...
But you talked to some girls, at least we saw in your report.
A lot of that was behind the scenes. I mean, I think you have to remember, as a reporter on this trip, we get to see the public segments, but not the private segments. We get briefed on those later. Mm-hmm. But I would say that she was generally very welcomed, and I think... To your point about African countries managing the relationship between the East and the West, I still think that American involvement in Africa, in African nations, in these three African nations, is welcomed. To an extent. But it is not the end-all, be-all. These countries are still balancing between the East and West. So yes, they're going to take a road from China, they're going to take a building from China, they're going to take military assistance from Russia, but they're also going to, I don't think it has to be one or the other. They can balance that.
But I think how quick those promises are going to be delivered also matters on especially bringing down the trust deficit that already exists in the continent.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the problem about democracy. The wheels grind very slowly.
Okay, now this is our show for the week. And I want to say a special thanks to our colleague Anita Powell for gracing us with her presence today. Anita,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of my co-host and our production team and everyone here at the Voice of America, I'm Amina Aliyu. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
you